Welp, looks like that time again. Time for another recent movie video. Weirdly, the only non-sequel modern movie I've covered since literally the start of my channel. And if you know me, there's a reason. Well, one, yeah, that. You deserve the world, Ruby. But I've been dreading this movie coming out. Oh, not because of the quality, it looks like it's amazing. What I've been dreading is the animation community's response. Being an animation fan recently, I swear it's been a complete pain. I know fandoms, especially animation, have been problematic and obnoxious forever, but I think it's gotten completely insufferable after the release of Puss in Boots 2. I've said before that I love the movie, but I cannot stand what it started. Being put on such a pedestal and dubbed as the new golden standard of movies, which I think is one of the most harmful practices to any piece of media, and it might be one of the worst cases. And it feels after, people demand the studio continuously live up to this standard, doing a perfectly decent, or in my mindset, actually great movies, but it's not idealized perfection. And treating the recent movies the studio came out with as some sort of new dark age the studio is going through is so much revisionist history that I don't acknowledge that the movies before Puss in Boots 2 weren't that different. Seriously, The Boss Baby 2 came out the year before, come on! At least before, I felt people were much more reasonable to animated movies, fine with good ones or even decent ones, and giving their praises or hell, even making big ironic celebrations of bad ones. But after that, no. Now everything has to be completely over-exaggerated in comparison. Where Ruby Gilman is terrible because of vague, it's generic complaints to the point where I swear people didn't actually watch it. Treating the Mario movie as horribly written because it didn't have an insanely complex or compelling plot, even if it's exactly like the source material. Or treating Wish like I killed their families. Even Kung Fu Panda 4, yeah, I didn't like it that much and had a ton of problems. Christ, stop treating it like it's the worst thing ever. You all said that 3 already ruined the series and no one actually gave that movie the respect it rightfully deserved. I've seen so many people complain that there's now some sort of Dreamworks problem, but actually, look through all the releases and you'll find it's never actually consistent in quality and virtually the same for every studio in existence. And if you knew literally anything about animated movie production, you know that movies are made in years by multiple different teams and not by some huge linear pipeline magically for your judgment. But hey, if it's not another last wish, then the studio deserves to die. Which made me really nervous when Wild Robot showed up. An incredibly artistic and seemingly emotional story of robot interacting with nature that felt so fresh and new. Well, fresh and new if you haven't seen the Overwatch Bastion trailer. And it looked amazing. And I was afraid. I was afraid this movie is going to repeat history. Another animated masterpiece that people put on a pedestal and praise as the new standard. The studio can do no wrong, and every other movie before was just complete garbage and should be thrown out. More of that revisionist history and over-expecting until the next movie pisses you off and you call the studio dead. You think I'm exaggerating, but literally, when the trailer came out, I've seen people say it's an apology for the bad movies they made, like grow the hell up. It amazes me how animation fans never actually respect animation and take it so much for granted. So, I was really not looking forward to the inevitable fandom fallout this movie would cause and contributes to why I don't like watching modern movies. But that's unfair to the movie. As much as I can't stand the animation community and practically made my channel to give appreciation to animation, I should judge the movie on its own merits. As usual, I didn't watch other trailers or information after to get a pure experience, and I will say, it does look like it's going to be a great movie. Something imaginative, heartfelt, beautiful. And if it wasn't for my dread of the community, I would be excited for it. I don't want to judge this movie as the savior of the studio. I want to watch this movie as it is and see how I felt of it after. I want to see how well this movie can move me like it's trying to and give me a fantastical experience like it seems to want to give. So, no more tangent or preamble how I feel about the online community. It's time to talk about the Wild Robot. Also, light spoilers from now on, but I'll keep the big stuff near the end, okay? Now, the Wild Robot was based off a book, but knowing Dreamworks, that's usually more of a suggestion than an adaptation. And as much as people say this is some fresh new idea, I'd argue it's really not. Robots being overtaken and interacting with nature has always been one of those sci-fi concepts exploring the parallels between harsh futuristic industry and the growth of nature. Hell, as I said, Bastion from Overwatch virtually has the same exact thing going on, and that cinematic has 25 million views. And arguably a good chunk of Wall-E has a similar thing going on. But I'm not saying the concept of the movie is bad and original, far from it. I'm just saying that this is part of a storytelling theme. I can't stand that train of thought, especially doing with Ruby Gilman complaints it's apparently having some high school tropes just makes it the worst thing ever now. So the movie is about a robot, a Rosm domesticated unit, which is the robot used to help in all sorts of tasks, think the normal robot servant type stuff, who find themselves on an isolated island, free from all humans, which their programming forces them to try and adapt, and tries to help the animals, which of course terrifies them as how to adapt to a wild, unpredictable world. But the robot, named Roz, learns the language of the animals and can speak and understand them freely. So yeah, the animals talk here, and it's not a silent movie like the first 10 or so minutes makes you think. Now, I just know this is gonna bother a ton of people. A lot of people are gonna complain that it's too immature and ruins the movie, and it should have been silent and purely visual. Now, I can understand it. A lot of people get more invested in something you have to feel and perceive and not be told. It reminds me a lot of WALL-E, where people complained that the first half was really good, and the best one was just a silent relationship between Wally and Eve they had to experience, and the second half with the humans sucks because the story's a lot more conventional. And even I'll admit I was more hooked when the island felt wild and Roz had to learn on her own how to do anything. But it's kind of a risky thing to do for an entire movie. It kind of makes it hard to tell complex stories, and I feel only a few are willing to fully commit to it. A lot of people can have trouble understanding what's going on and demand your focus, and kids and hell, even adults might have trouble with it. And come on, don't tell me they don't. This community is so damn dense. So I understand why they didn't fully commit to it, and even then Roz talked plenty herself. But in this movie's defense, they do use the talking a lot. It's needed for the plot for Roz to understand the complex emotions and scenes going on, and to go deeper into them and the other characters' mindsets, and to move the plot further, which would be really hard to do otherwise. I don't think you could easily make this movie without dialogue and it would be perfect. It would take a lot of rewriting. And I really don't like this coulda, shoulda, woulda bullcrap because anything could be better. That's not an actual critique. I think the talking was fine, but I just know people won't like it. Now eventually, Roz befriends a Sly Fox who's probably looks like Nick Wilde named Fink, but her main task becomes to raise a goose she found to adulthood named Bright Bill, and of course having to learn about herself, defying her programming, and finding about the natural world and becoming a wild robot. So it's not exactly like Bastion of a robot living in nature, and more of a combination of Iron Giant and that one South Korean Leafy movie by a chicken raising a duck. So it's kind of weird in that case, but the direction can work, and believe me, it does. They really do get the emotion out of the setup and being a surrogate parent raising a child and being unfamiliar with it and the worldview. Speaking of which, I should go into the characters, starting with Roz. Yeah, I love Roz, she's awesome. She has such an adorable innocence in the usual helper robot fashion, ever optimistic and naive about the real world or anything outside of her programming. It's a lot of great interactions, making you love how adorable they are and invest on how they learn. They play so much with their animation and capabilities, it's amazing. She has a ton of extra gadgets, abilities, functionality, and even animation playing with their robotic, windly, spindly body. It's so fantastic. She really does act like this robot of the future that can do anything. Haven't really seen a Dreamworks protagonist play around with the animation and motion of themselves since Ruby Gilman, you know how much I love that. But it's the journey that truly makes the character. Seeing Roz forced to override her programming and learn how to care for a living being and to give pure, genuine, emotional love, it is so heartwarming and compelling. The journey is so incredible, where they're second-guessing her worldview and being incapable of understanding emotions in the way of nature and accepting they might end up being defective, but still try and complete their task. I don't know what it is about robots and making incredibly compelling and emotional stories. I think it could be because robots are just blank slates, perfect telling stories about understanding humanity from the point of view of a character who can't understand. How can something incapable of emotions understand love, compassion, friendship, life, and nature? It's a writer's dream to tell these type of stories. And this movie is another example, taking full advantage of it. I'd say Roz is in between something like Baymax and WALL-E, starting out like Baymax of an unemotional robot relying on programming to help people, but later on much more like WALL-E, understanding feelings of love and care. And yeah, she's so great to see in action. Her dedication to raising Brightbill and second-guessing her purpose and programming, it's so nice. I can't believe that Dreamworks effectively made a story of motherhood from a mom's perspective, but I'm glad they did because it's so nice. I said Agatha was Dreamworks' best mom, but she definitely has some competition here. Seeing her dedication and journey was the real drive and heart of the movie, and I couldn't get enough of it. It's incredible work, and she's one of my favorite characters. Fink, on the other hand, is a bit more of a standard character. You've seen this type before, especially compared to Nick Wilde. I know it's more of a relative reference, but it reminded me a lot of Jax from Digital Circus. Yeah, feel free to hate me in the comments. Sly, manipulative, but of course later on gets a heart of gold. Fink kinda confused me in the beginning because they go back and forth a bit. Like, it seems he wants to hang out with Roz to get close to the baby Brightbill to eat them, but also just wants to hang out around Roz to have them do work for them. It's weird in the beginning because again, you go back and forth on it, where out of nowhere one to start eating Brightbill and then doesn't. Even more actually showing off an emotional side, but then disregarding it, it kind of makes it hard to find out his whole deal. But luckily they do drop her, he becomes a nicer character, still sassy and kind of manipulative, but as one helped the two out, seeing them as more of a found family. It's also weird because they hint an emotional backstory with him that never really gets acknowledged. Like, I really don't know how to feel about it. Like, if they did get into it and just flat out had a scene explaining how orphaned or something, or if it's much more nuanced and better, if it's more subtle. I don't know, you be the judge. Now, Fink plays the role of the smart aleck, street smart, or well, wild smart psychic that befriends the main character and helps guide them and give advice on how things work around here. You know, in retrospect, they kind of remind me a lot of Aquafina's character in Killer Panda 4, but better. But I felt the movie didn't really use him too much in the emotional parts aside from maybe a few moments, and he does have an arc moving past his selfish and conniving character to become a better person and genuine friend. Not the most compelling character, but he served this role well and could be pretty fun. And there's Brightbill, Roz's surrogate son and arguably the main focus of the conflict. Now I kind of hate to say it, but he's probably the most generic and boring character, at least by himself. Now I'm not saying he was bad or anything, but he does play a role you would effectively expect. When he's born, he's the loving, dotting baby trying to understand the world, and it's really cute, especially with Roz trying to learn how to actually take care of him. Though god, they really beat up this baby, Jesus! I'm surprised he actually lived to maturity. This movie also is a beat up Roz, especially in the beginning, like what gives? But weirdly the movie has a random time skip where Brightbill becomes an adult or at least a teenager. Like I was actually really surprised and I thought they'd at least make a montage, but no, it just gets completely skipped. I will admit it felt like something that should have been explored more since it felt like a missed opportunity. But yeah, Brightbill's a teenager and kind of becomes a bit of that usual fish out of water, lame dork who can't fit in stereotype you've pretty much already seen before. It does feel disappointing in a movie about nature and literally about being in the wild, that a main character has an art that feels out of high school. Like, I hate to bring it up again, but at least Ruby Gilman, you know what you're getting into. But the relationship and the journey really made this work. Roz trying her best to raise Brightbill the best she can with limited knowledge and resources, and trying to understand motherhood, and Brightbill has to deal with being raised by an actual robot, and affecting how he was raised and how different he is from the other geese. Even if, yeah, he gets bullied by other geese for it. But another interesting aspect of the character is that he's pretty much a runt who should have never survived as long as he did. And it's acknowledged that without Roz trying her best to keep him alive, he wouldn't make it. It's a really interesting and provoking theme that I absolutely love, and especially seeing Roz help him to get over it, helping him become strong and being able to live on his own and join his flock. Oh, it's so beautiful and emotional. Like, this part of the story genuinely got me. That power of overcoming yourself and the odds to become a better version of yourself. It's always something that means the most to me. So yeah, even if Brightbill as a character wasn't too interesting as a person, what they did with him was beautiful. Now to get to more ambiguous aspects. Unfortunately, I don't think the other animal characters were too compelling and largely just comedic stereotypes. I mean, we got some nihilistic possums that pretty much overuse every possum joke having too many kids and playing dead. Honestly, I don't like the cute thing obsessed with death joke. It really didn't work in the Mario movie. It's hard to actually get into. I mean, at least it makes more sense with possums there. There's a weirdo beaver playing with the artistic type of character, which again makes sense, but they're pretty shallow regardless and largely just exist to set up a plot point. He does do one good thing I love to Roz, and I kind of wish we got more of that kind of stuff in development from the animals. They even introduced one who's actually kind of important to the plot and could be really interesting, but they're barely relevant after. It's so weird. Again, it's weird how a lot of these animals act almost exactly like people, and especially the weird bully geese who again feel like they came out of some high school coming of age story. I do think it's going to be the thing that people complain the most about, saying that they shouldn't have bothered. And a lot of the animals do pretty much stay as their comedic stereotypes without much depth. It has an unfortunate effect of making the wild not really feel like the wild when the animals act so human and modern, which I think is kind of a problem. I wonder if they should have made it like how the Jungle Book story built its world, where the animals are given human-like traits but live much more like a tribal yet structured society with rules and laws. Again, maybe I'm asking for too much. It's also weird that this humanization kind of makes the logic where, like, how do the animals hunt each other if they're on the same level and can form complex relationships? Even weirder, as Roz helps to unify multiple animals together, it's just begging the question. Speaking of the wild, the movie actually gets pretty dark at moments. Like, not even so how Brightbill gets beat up as a kid, or how Roz is thrashed and thrown around. They don't brush aside how brutal the wild can get, and early on there's a ton of brutality and death they don't skim out on. Getting into a bit more of the spoiler side about now. but there's even a death of an important character, and it does kind of hurt. I do wish it got more acknowledgement because it feels almost forgotten after. The pacing is weird too, like tell me if I'm crazy, but like early on it feels like it goes way too fast with Roz learning about nature, then jumps to an action sequence, and then a mellow moment, and then immediately back to an action sequence, and again. But the later moments do have much smoother pacing. But still, the theme can be just as dark and grim as it is inspiring and beautiful, just like how nature is. Speaking of which, I need to talk about the thing I obsess over, animation. Good lord, this movie is beautiful. It's seriously one of Dreamworks' best looking movies, and frankly, they have a lot of freaking competition. It has such great, amazing lighting, shading, atmosphere, and cinematography. It's so damn glorious. It's helped a lot more by the stylization, giving the brushwork style similar to Puss in Boots 2. And while it is marvelous where it's great in the film, I do think it might contribute to another problem in the animation community, where people think this is what animation should always be. Now, stylization is great and makes so much more artistic inspiration and environment, bringing new creativity and freshness to the medium. I love it! But I've seen people complain that, like, Ruby Gillman had bad animation because it wasn't like Puss in Boots 2, even though stylized animation was a rarity during its development. First of all, shut the hell up, this movie is gorgeous and does the underwater aesthetic amazingly. Second, stylization is always done for a reason, and it's to enhance the theme and subject of the movie. Spider-Verse uses its stylization to emulate being a comic as much as possible. Puss in Boots 2 uses stylization to make it look like a painted fairy tale brought to life into exaggerated animation. And Wild Robot uses that same stylization to enhance the beauty of nature and for environmental storytelling and atmosphere, admittedly without the cut frames. Ruby Gillman isn't trying to emulate an art form or to push some sort of abstract theme, it's just trying to be itself and does a great job at it. Don't force stylization just to have it, it's forcing animation to be one thing, and that defeats the entire point. You know, newcomers are probably wondering why I bring up Ruby Gillman so much, and yeah, welcome to my channel. But back on topic, the Wild Robot's environments and aesthetics are completely gorgeous, with such great shots and atmospheric lighting. If you know me, you know how much I obsess over good animation and art design, and this movie is one of the best. I actually got teary-eyed just how beautiful this movie gets. I do admit I cry easily, but so much this movie seriously pushes it. Again, not only the characters and relationships so compelling and heartfelt, but the animation and atmosphere is so brilliant and moving, it feels so magical. I wonder if people wonder why I'm so obsessed with animation and art when it's unfairly deemed immature. But this movie really proves why. In a ton of scenes and moments, especially one with the characters and relationships so heartfelt and loving, the determination of everyone to succeed and be their best, how emotionally got attached, to the way the visuals so beautifully and truly alive with the music swelling up, making it feel so grand. It doesn't just become animation, it becomes an experience, and I'm not afraid to say it. But I should get more into the rest of the movie, and the problems that rose up. Really big spoilers for the rest of it. And this movie should not be spoiled for you, please skip ahead. I'll give you some time. Okay, so we good? Okay, so the plot of the movie is Roz trying to get Brightbill to fly out for their winter migration. It makes me wonder if this was anything like that one Illumination movie I never saw. And her finally letting them go, wondering if she's feeling love, and Brightbill wondering about his future, potentially leaving behind the only mother he knew. God, it got me. Especially the truth of Ryan get a flying start, like I cried. It was so glorious and heartfelt, and it moved me truly. And I really thought the movie was gonna end there, it felt like the emotional climax. But yet it weirdly kept going. Like, am I the only one who felt weird? Like, it had a perfectly serviceable ending there that would have been the most emotionally mature and resonant. But it did keep going, and it did start to decline a bit. Because then we get a weird third act where we finally get to see the rest of the world and humanity, showing it's in the future and the Earth has seemingly gone somewhat to ruin with big rising sea levels. It introduces a lot of questions of the world that disappointingly gets no answers. Which would be okay if it's a background thing, but it becomes a plot point with the human settlement the geese somehow end up in and cause a panic, which, come on, you'll get no geese, why it's treated as a crisis. Winter is also deadly, which makes you wonder if it's because of humans and climate change, but again, it's not exactly addressed and raises more questions. But Ross takes all the animals and makes them make a peace and join with each other, which does contribute a bit more to the problem that the wild doesn't really feel too wild. And Brightbill does come back, which again feels more like an epilogue to their story, but it does lead to Ross feeling like he's not needed anymore and willing to go back to the factory. But then out of nowhere, like in the last 20 minutes, maybe even less of the movie, we randomly get introduced to the villain. Universal Dynamics, the company that made Roz, doesn't just want them back by protocol, but apparently was after them specifically because they want to use her changed program for research and drain her memories? Like, what? You can't do this? literally no idea what universal dynamics even is aside from making helper robots. It's some evil corporation that they end the world like in WALL-E. It's so confusing. Why do they want her so bad they're willing to kill to get to her? What did they want their programming for? Like, it feels so forced in the narrative. I don't think this movie needs a villain, especially when it's so late and randomly. Even the envoy looks like some Metroid Dread thing. Seems to have genuine sadism and malice, despite they shouldn't. Imagine if your Alexa gained sapience and Amazon sends in military to get it back and attack your family. Actually, maybe it's not too unrealistic. I didn't think this worked at all, and maybe if it was built up more it would work, but it's not. It had a perfect way to, since they literally had an exposition robot earlier. It just really bothers me. This whole third act feels really messy to me, but it did have some of the best moments in the movie, like Roz pleading to not have her memories erased, since she now understands what it's like to feel, and begs to at least remember Brightbill, and Brightbill leading the geese gain the respect of their migration to fight back and save his mom, with her finally able to admit she loves him, and frankly sacrifice herself to save him. Oh my god, it's so emotional, I'm gonna die out here! But what's her face? Not Otto said that the company will never stop going after her to retrieve her. Which again, why? You never explain their MO. This makes no sense. And Roz actually agrees and is forced to actually go back and kind of nullifies the entire climax with all the Woodland friends, especially Fink and Brightbill, begging her not to. But she promises that her essence won't be forgotten as she willingly gets recalled. So yeah, the villain kind of won. It's so weird. But the ending does show that despite what it looks like, Roz did still retain her memory and love for her son, and it's so damn emotional. So yeah, I think the movie got a whole lot messier at the end, and it reminded me a lot of how WALL-E had two separate acts and tones that lost a lot of itself at the end, but arguably worse and a lot more trouble in the narrative side. But it doesn't ruin the movie. It's still incredibly heartfelt and got me to cry, and I'm not afraid to admit it. And I think above all, it is important to acknowledge the movie's problems. I think it's necessary. It's good that we don't treat a movie as perfection, that we don't lie to ourselves and put it above all the rest. It's a terrible mindset that destroys animation discussion and appreciation. I love this movie, I thought it was spectacular, and I will acknowledge it's not perfect. Putting media on a pedestal is one of the worst things you can do. Not even so as Puss in Boots 2, since I've already discussed the unfortunate impact of treating something like that as a new gold standard. Every animated movie is expected to live up to a story of a larger-than-life hero facing his own mortality and desperately trying to escape death, and that just won't work, and people need to acknowledge that. Expecting that is a fool's errand and destroys someone's appreciation for other animated media that doesn't try to reach that height. It's not even that. Gravity Falls is put on such a pedestal as an animated masterpiece, where other story-driven shows like Amphibia and Owl House are expected to reach that, with people over-exaggerating their problems, like saying their first seasons were too meandering and bad, when Gravity Falls' first season was arguably worse in that regard. It's a toxic mindset that should not be a thing. And I pray that The Wild Robot wouldn't be another example of that and repeat history as a new gold standard, where we can acknowledge its problems and still find it fantastic. I think this movie is amazing. It's heartfelt, beautiful, emotional, and it feels like it's up there as one of Dreamworks' best. I loved it, and it got me so emotional and moved. Is it perfect? No, but it doesn't need to be. It feels like the animation community only treats movies as disasters, mediocre, or masterpieces, and that's so unfair and unreasonable. Animated movies have so much to offer that so many people, even in the community, disregard and overly exemplify problems or ignore them and treat them as perfect. And that's a terrible mindset to have. And I just know people are gonna say, oh, this movie would be perfect if it was for one thing, or even worse, shit like we're finally out of the Dreamworks dark age or some bullshit, and use this movie as a way to put other movies down for not living up to it. And that's awful. This movie shouldn't be weaponized to take things down, it should be loved in its own regard. That attitude I feel ruins the spirit and point of this movie that's so heartfelt and emotional, and used to put something down is just awful. And I know I can't stop what the animation community will do, no matter how much I try on this channel, to no avail. But I'm begging, please do not keep that attitude. Don't put movies on a pedestal or don't treat them like they destroyed your life. Animation is a beautiful and lovely art form that shouldn't be used for that, and puts imaginary problems with the studios that make them. And this movie is a prime example. It has its problems, but it's still amazing, and that's fine. It's beautiful, moving, relatable, magical even. And I recommend you see it for yourselves. It's too good a movie not to see. Watch it, let it move you, and most of all, let it remind you what it feels to be alive, to care, and to love again. Just like our main character. You know, I posted this clip multiple times in previous videos, but hell with it. I think it's worded one last time. Thank you, and goodbye. Before I end, I really want to talk about Dreamworks in general. Dreamworks is my favorite animation studio, and I'm not one of those people who act like Puss in Boots 2 is the only movie they ever made. So many of their movies speak to me in ways that no other ones have. There's a reason so many of their movies deal with characters and their personal identities, responsibilities, and insecurities that so many people have. To me, while the best of Disney is like the Mona Lisa, iconic with marvelous structure and arguably perfected, Dreamworks is like Starry Night, with incredible artistry, creativity, and experimentation to bring a piece that resonates inside my soul like nothing else. It can make an even greater experience. And yeah, sure, they may have a reputation of making bad or pandering movies, but they also make such great artistic works, even many of them that turn out the way people think. You never know what to expect, and I love that about it. They're always willing to try something new, even if it might not work out the best. They made some absolute masterpieces that have touched me and millions of other people, movies I personally relate to a lot more than other studios' works. Even in a few movies I absolutely love, and I feel don't get the credit they deserve, and some who eventually got it now. They represent so much I love about art and animation, the willingness to experiment, add personal touches, and just embrace creativity and love for the medium and its franchises. And I will always love and support them no matter what. And I seriously cannot wait to see what they'll do next. After all...
Welcome to life, urban child. Report for duty.
I love your cold unfeeling robot arm.
Attention everyone! Run for your lives! Robots have taken over the world!